It's never an easy task to imagine what ancient religious texts are trying to tell us. Welcome to AI Story. Today, let's see how artificial intelligence could help us illustrate the Old Testament. In the beginning, God created the universe and early humans were born on a planet named Earth to carry on God's mission. Humans were created in God's image. However, soon after, people realized they preferred to live their own lives, rather than those prescribed by God. After the world was filled with violence and selfishness, God decided to start again with just one family. This family was headed by Noah, who constructed an ark and made it through the great flood together with the animals on board. After this, God made a covenant with a man named Abraham. The land around you is now yours. You and your family will be my blessing to the entire planet. This family developed into a sizable nation called Israel in just a few generations. Scared of the Israelites, the Egyptians forced them into slavery. Through one magnanimous leader named Moses, God led the Israelites to a great exodus back toward their promised land by dividing the Red Sea in two. Along the journey, God gave laws and commands in Mount Sinai to help the Israelites obey God's ways. The Israelites eventually made it back to their homeland in the Promised Land after 40 years of battling and suffering in the desert. Following their victory, the people adored God, but soon after, they rebelliously turned away from Him. From generation to generation, this evolved into a pattern. Samuel was the most able judge in Israel. He talked as a prophet for God and walked in God's ways. He reminded Israel that God was the only monarch they would ever need, but they insisted on wanting a human king to reign over them like the other countries because they wanted to be like the corrupted nations around them. So Samuel found a man named Saul to be Israel's first king. His reign began with a positive start, but Saul soon ceased following God's ways and started making poor choices. So Samuel notified Saul, "Because you have turned your back on God, God has rejected you as a king." Samuel searched for the future monarch. He discovered David, a courageous young shepherd boy, as a result of his investigation. Once David did grow up to be king, God blessed him and the Israelites endorsed him. However, David wasn't really perfect. He had an affair with a married woman and committed a murder to conceal the affair. Nevertheless, deep inside him, David always loved God and would return to living in God's ways. Known as the poet-warrior, he composed songs for God called psalms. A psalm is a sincere manifestation of a prayer, struggle, and thankfulness. David ruled for a long time before handing the throne up to his son, Solomon. God also told the following prediction to David: "One day, one of your descendants will rule with the kingdom that will never end." Succeeding the death of his father, Solomon ruled Israel as the wealthiest and most influential king of its history. Solomon wrote works such as the Proverbs because he was overflowing with God's wisdom. He also constructed a magnificent permanent temple to serve as a reminder of God's perpetual presence. Nevertheless, Solomon hid himself from God by wedding impure women who persuaded him to worship false gods. After a civil war broke out, the nation was split into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Soon, corrupted kings who rejected God's will took over control of both of these kingdoms. During these times, prophets were sent as messengers, calling the Israelites to reconnect to God. They alerted of the devastating consequences that will come. By pleading with God for an impressive display of fire, the prophet Elijah, a rough and tough man, exposed false prophets. Following him, the prophet Elijah caused a young boy to sneeze, which brought the boy back to life. The Israelites and their monarchs were urged by these prophets to convert back to God's more compassionate ways. But the Israelites were unreceptive. The kingdoms of Israel and Judah were both conquered by other countries. They came in while they were distracted with their own rebellions. The promised country was taken away from God's people, and many were sold as slaves. Once again, the temple was devastated and the people lost everything. During this period, known as the exile, many of the Israelites, now recognized as Jews, were dispersed throughout many lands. A prophet by the name of Daniel was dispatched to the city of Babylon. Daniel refused to abide by the city's law, which required everyone to only pray to the king of Babylon 3 times every day. Therefore, Daniel was thrown into a pit of starving lions, but God closed the lions' mouths, and Daniel came out the next day unharmed. Those scattered people were not abandoned. Heavenly Father was still watching over the Jewish people. Through the words of the prophet Jeremiah, God spoke to them and gave them hope. I'll make a new covenant with the people of Israel, returning them to the promised land and filling their hearts and minds with my ways. This hope was fulfilled 60 years later. The Jewish people were set free to go back to their promised country by the Persian Empire. A small group assembled at the nation's capital, Jerusalem, where Ezra led the construction of a new and more modest temple. Reunited, they celebrated and shouted with joy. The elders, though, sobbed as they remembered what had been lost. Future-looking prophets like Isaiah and Malachi foretold the arrival of a future monarch, or Messiah. One person who would bring a new kingdom of peace and entirely restore Israel. Jews therefore waited and prayed. Over 400 years, God would not communicate with the prophets. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed it. Before you leave, please remember to subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. See you soon for another AIstory.